Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is part 8 of the Theodore Robert Bundy series. It's going to deal with 4 more murders and his first arrest. So if you haven't caught parts 1 through 7, they build on each other, so you can push pause and we'll be right back here when you're caught up. And here's the trigger warning. These videos are not made for children and viewer discretion is advised. So it's March 1975. The task forces are forming for these missing girls, and after bodies were found, they were starting to link many of these cases together. A lot of people were just scared stiff, especially the younger women. People were terrified that Ted may be a resident of their area. Girls stopped walking around towns at night, and people began to lock their doors. So it's March 15th, 1975, and this is Julie Cunningham, age 26, of Vail, Colorado. She was an attractive 5'5" woman with dark hair and brown eyes. She was athletic and she loved to ski. This article talks about how in Vail she was living a storybook life of low-cost leisure, and that her social calendar was seldom empty, and the best skiing of the world was in Vail. She earned spending money as a ski instructor and a part-time clerk at a sporting goods store. She had majored in education and she had plans to become an elementary school teacher. On the night of March 15th, 1975, she told her roommate she was going to a nearby tavern, and then she left. So she left out on foot. Her personal effects, her clothing, and her car were left untouched. And remember, the Zodiac murderer was also operating at this time. And for whatever reason, the authorities went to look and see if there was any kind of linkage between the cases, and they could not find any. But by October 27th of 1975, after something else that's going to happen later in this video, they're going to start linking all the cases, and hers is the first that they will link, Julie, and then the next one, Denise Lynn Oliverson. And then by November 1st, they will believe that it is linked to Ted Bundy. And this is back in 1975, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ted will eventually confess to her murder while on death row, explaining that he lured her into a parking lot while he was wearing a fake cast on his leg. He said he was using crutches to approach her. He asked her to help him carry his ski boots to his car, and that he hit her over the head with a pipe. As her body has never been found, her disappearance technically remains unsolved, and that's why you will see her on the Charlie Project. The police tried to locate her body. Ted was vague. He claimed that he buried her someplace near Rifle, and that he came back to the site 4 weeks later and reburied her elsewhere. Here it says he confessed to killing her. He dumped her body in a remote spot somewhere between Rulison and Newcastle. Then he returned 4 to 5 weeks later and reburied the remains. Ted attempted to show on maps at the very end where he could have buried her. These pictures are credit of whereabouts still unknown, trying to locate the area on the maps that she could still be buried. So then we play Where's Ted? This is from the FBI files. On March 15th, 1975, he purchased gas in Dillon in Silverthorne, Colorado, and then that same day, the Silverthorne police chief saw him allegedly walking into a Holiday Inn in Frisco, so that's near Vail. And then it's believed that he was in Vail and that he abducted Julie Cunningham. And on the next day, what does he do? If you've been watching this series, you know he called his girlfriend. And then 3 weeks later, Ted is in Grand Junction. He was out trolling around looking for a victim, and he came across Denise Lynn Oliverson. Her maiden name was Nicholson. That day, Denise got into an argument with her husband, and she cycled away from her home around 3 p.m. She was on her way to see her parents, and that was going towards Lincoln Park. This article reads, in a huff, she decided to take a bike ride to her parents' home. Around 3 p.m. that day, she mounted her yellow bicycle and departed from her home in Grand Junction, Colorado, wearing blue jeans and a print blouse. The weather made it a glorious, beautiful Sunday afternoon. And then she was gone. On that same day, police found her bicycle and shoes under a 5th Street bridge. It's near a viaduct, near railroad tracks, but they had been unable to come up with any leads. Captain Borax's YouTube channel on here is really great. I recommend it. And he had found an arrest record for her. She had just been arrested for smoking marijuana before. And sadly, some of the evidence was allegedly lost. According to Tim Rushing and his partner, Jim Fromm, many items were collected under the bridge, but they didn't make it into the evidence locker. Like there was a purse, a belt, I think even her bike. They all just kind of went missing. Her sandals were left in evidence. They were found under the overpass, and I believe he just hit her so hard it knocked her right out of her shoes. In this video, we're going to get into Ted's first arrest, but I just want to note again that after his arrest, they're going to start tying in the Cunningham, the Oliverson, and the other murders. They're going to start seeing that there's a pattern and thinking, oh, it could be this Ted Bundy guy. So let's play Where's Ted? It's April 4th, 1975. He bought gas at Golden, Colorado. And then it's believed that he abducted Denise while she was riding her bicycle. And then he turned around and bought gas at Silverton, Colorado. So that was in that same area, in Grand Junction. That wasn't where he was from. And then he's still around Grand Junction on the 6th. And I think you probably know why. In his last days on Earth, in order to try to bargain for more time, he did admit to many murders. He admitted to Denise's abduction and murder. Apparently, Bundy told investigators enough information about the case to convince them that he was the one that killed her. And he told Fisher that he abducted her and buried her on the same trip on which he buried Cunningham. Ted will talk to investigators to try to help with the Green River Killer case. And he was talking about different changes in MOs and changes in victims to avoid detection. He was really subconsciously talking about himself. And what he said is, if there are such victims, they pose a number of interesting possibilities. Maybe his tastes change occasionally. Maybe he simply made a mistake and thought one of those exceptional victims was something she wasn't. Nobody's perfect. And this was a letter to the Green River Task Force of October 27th, 1984. I also think that this is kind of how he tried to explain taking schoolgirls. And they knew about Kimberly Leach at this point, that she was 12 years old, but they didn't know about Lynette Culver. And he will later admit to her murder. Ted later confessed to making an overnight trip to Pocatello to, quote, indulge the madness. It was May 6, 1975, and Lynette Culver, age 12, from Pocatello, Idaho, who was 5'2", 105 pounds with brown hair, hazel blue eyes, in the 7th grade at Alameda Junior High School, was just getting out of school. And when you search her name on newspapers.com for her area, you'll see that for many years she was in different dances, and she would make it into the paper with her dances, as seen here, and also as seen here. This is from 1971. Lynette left during lunch break and went to Fort Hall after school, and for whatever reason, some of the authorities assumed that she was a runaway. However, police investigator Al Kuda knew better. He said, "She lived next door to me, and she was a wholesome kid, real healthy. I was not aware that Lynette Culver was missing until the next day. It really surprised me because she comes from a real fine family. It still surprises me because I could just not feature her taking off. She was a normal kid. She was a little afraid of the dark and perhaps a little shy, but she was normal." Here's a picture of her dad looking at her picture. And then there was usually a write-up on the anniversary of her going missing. You'd find these in the papers. It's really so sad, and she wasn't totally linked to Ted Bundy until later on because of her age. I guess they just didn't think he was into taking 12-year-olds, but guess what? He was. So let's play Where's Ted? It was May 5th, 1975, when he drove to Pocatello, and he was trolling for a victim in Pocatello. He would later admit that's the sole reason he drove there. And this information is from Captain Borax's YouTube channel regarding Lynette's disappearance. They had started tying things together once Ted confessed, and so they contacted the head of security for Idaho State University, because Ted had said something about, well, like, he had some kind of confrontation at the dorm there. While he was confessing, Ted had said that he had gone to Pocatello and that he had gone to a university dormitory there and had attempted to locate a victim, but he had been confronted and told to leave the premises by a security guard. And Ted liked to stay at the Holiday Inn, so more than likely, unless he slept in his vehicle, that's probably where he stayed. And then he ran across Lynette. Ted Bundy will later say he drove to Pocatello, took Lynette around noon, drove her to a hotel at the Holiday Inn, raped and drowned her in the bathtub there, and then disposed of her body in the Snake River. He said that her family had recently moved to Pocatello, and that was another detail that was not known to the public. Unlike other serial killers, we don't have any evidence that Ted Bundy ever falsely confessed to something he didn't do. If anything, it was the opposite. It was like pulling teeth to get known information out of him when they had circumstantial evidence that he was the perpetrator. He wasn't always willingly confessing anything. In fact, he seemed to hold back the information and the memories as if he was, enjoying knowing the truth and nobody else did. I think that's also part of his fantasy of owning someone even in death. So he's the only one that knows what truly happened, how it happened, maybe where he left bodies, that he owned them. So, and then June 28, 1975, there's Susan Curtis. She was on the campus of Brigham Young University. Here's a really strange twist. Both the Debbie Kent and the Curtis families were at that Viewmont High School production of The Redhead on November 8th, from which Ted abducted Debbie Kent. Clearly, Ted was using this area as his hunting ground. Perhaps he was also kind of going back nearby looking for Raylan Shepard that got away. You never know. Susan had been in a Mormon youth conference banquet on Brigham Young University campus when she told a roommate that she was going to walk back to the dormitories a quarter-mile away, but she never made it back. And the Curtises were just another family to keep their porch light on in memory of their missing child. Marilyn Curtis said that her disappearance was especially hard on Susan's sister because Susan's sister was also at that conference and didn't walk her sister. So she always felt guilty about that. So let's play Where Was Ted? Well, the FBI shows that he was in Salt Lake City on the 25th, and that on the 27th they believe that he abducted Susan Curtis from Brigham Young University in Provo. On the 30th, they had him also in Salt Lake City. And stranger than strange, on the beginning of July, he was applying to be a security guard at the University of Utah. Talk about a rat being in a cheese factory, right? And the University of Utah police chief who interviewed Ted for the job as a security guard remembered, quote, he was really impressive. Oh, that's so scary. Ted eventually confessed in his last hours to the murder of Susan Curtis. And with that confession, the authorities tried to search for her where they thought she could possibly be, but they were never able to find her remains. At different points in the searches, they would find things, animal bones, human bones, and it never turned out to be that of Susan Curtis. So if you see her, she'll still be listed on the Charlie Project and other missing persons sites like the Utah Department of Public Safety. Let's talk about the beginning of Ted's downfall. His first arrest was in 1975. He was out trolling and he got caught. But he got caught for something else. So let's get into it. It's August 16th, 1975. It's around 3 a.m. and Trooper Bob Hayward is in his own neighborhood sitting in his patrol car during the last 20 minutes of his shift. And he spots a gray VW pass by with its headlights off. And Ted's VW had been parked outside the Gregson family home where 2 teenage daughters were inside alone. Now, this wasn't known by Bob Hayward at that exact moment, but people who follow this case believe that Ted was stalking these 2 girls inside. Since it was Hayward's neighborhood and he knew the cars and their plate numbers, at one point he gets a call and he's driving and the Volkswagen rabbits, like a scared rabbit, will bolts from the curb with its lights off, tires squealing, and then once on the main road, Ted flipped on his headlights and eventually Hayward pursues Ted at a high rate of speed and Ted ends up running a stop sign. By the way, all of Hayward's recollections are on YouTube and it's a great video to watch. He takes the interviewee around the area and walks step by step through this whole ordeal. Anyway, Hayward calls in for backup, but Daryl Ondrak is who's called out. Ted's pulled over in his VW into an abandoned gas station, gets out, and he approaches the officer's door, and I believe the officer went ahead and put his gun up on the door and told him to stand right there. And according to Bundy's driver's license, he was on the wrong side of town. So Hayward is questioning Bundy, shining his flashlight into the VW, and he sees the passenger seat was removed and the VW bug into the back seat. And right there tells you that Ted was in full stalker mode, because what he did was he tended to remove his passenger seat in order to transport his quote-unquote cargo, which are usually abducted women. So there's a brown satchel or gym bag on the floor that Hayward sees, and Bundy allows his VW to be searched. This law student knew better. Honestly, if he had a lick of sense, he would have insisted on a search warrant or something, but he didn't. So Ted knew he could lawyer up at that point. He did not. He enjoyed the game. He underrated his opponents at every turn. And in that brown satchel will appear what seems to be burglary tools. Burglary tools at best, and something way more sinister at worst. And it was worse. So there was an ice pick, a crowbar, nylon pantyhose, a silk pantyhose mask with the eyes and the nose cut out, a ski mask, sheets torn into strips, rope, flashlight. In the trunk were the handcuffs, and under the driver's seat was the crowbar. Bushy-haired Ted was wearing a dark blue turtleneck, blue jeans, and tennis shoes. So he was dressed as a prowler. And Bundy told the trooper, Hayward, that he was at the movie, The Towering Inferno. But, you go on your CB radio. I wasn't playing at the theater that night. So his lie was exposed. It was revealed on the scene, and then he was quote unquote confused as to where he was and why he was there, and he tried to outwit the officers. Initially, Ted was arrested for attempting to evade a police officer because he had seemingly run after he was signaled, but he was warned right then that they were going to pursue the possession of burglary tools. And on August 21st, 1975, he was in fact arrested for the possession of the burglary tools. Ted tried to explain away all the evidence, and there will be a trial for this. And Ted's downstairs neighbor at the rooming house, Margith Mon, was also a judge's daughter, asked him why in the world he allowed this officer to search the vehicle. And Ted had told her at the time, "No, I let him. I've got nothing to hide, and they're too dumb to find anything anyway." Well, guess what, buddy? Tried to argue that he didn't even consent to the search of his vehicle, even though there were 2 people there. It was just another lie, like his towering inferno lie. And later on at the stand for the Durant trial, Ted will tell the long-winded story of smoking pot out of the VW and trying to toss everything out of the windows before being pulled over, and that was the real reason he was rabbiting away from the police officer. And he'll admit that he initially told the officer a lie about the drive-in movie, and that the second lie was just really trying to get rid of some marijuana. Now, granted, marijuana, would get you arrested back then, but an officer will take the witness stand to testify he didn't smell any marijuana. He didn't find any paraphernalia except for the burglary tools and what looked like kidnapping tools. But that day, at the day that he was arrested for this, he was arrested and he was released ROR. That means on his own recognizance. Again, he will then be arrested for the burglary tools, and he will even allow them to search his apartment. Then later he will claim he didn't consent to it, though there's a search form in his own handwriting consenting to it. He was a liar. And we'll get to all this in the next episode, but I want to leave you with this letter. It's from Detective Ben Forbes to Robert Keppel. Remember, he is one of the people heading up the King County Department of Public Safety, looking into all these unsolves. And he's like, "Dear Bob, thought you might be interested in this." And he talks about how they arrested a Ted Bundy prowling a residential neighborhood. So here we are. This letter right here is where they start tying everything all together and realizing they got their man, and their man thinks he's smarter than the cops, and he's going to let them look in his house. And when they get in his house, they're going to find some more circumstantial evidence. So keep thinking you're the smartest person in the room, Ted. But we'll get into that in part 9. So if you found this informative, hit that like button. If you want to be notified when I upload the next part, just hit that subscribe bell. You just get a little notification telling you that Part 9 is ready. And without further ado, have an excellent day. Bye.